right, welcome listeners to episode 1 of Future Secured, a podcast by the Murrell Group. And today what we're doing is we're going to talk about laying the cyber foundations for Australia. So, we want to set the stage for a crucial conversation on Australia's ambitious 2030 cybersecurity strategy. It's a bold vision to position Australia as a global leader in cybersecurity, a place that, we've dominated in mining and other areas up to date. So how can we actually achieve this mantle? So we dissect the strategy framework, goals, and we're going to, have some chats around the formidable challenges, we face in funding and resources in order to get there. So I'd like to welcome my co-host, Jason Murrell, co-founder of Murrell Group. And today we have Dan Maslin, who is the Chief Information Security Officer at Monash University. So welcome to you, Dan.
Thanks for having us, Tom and Jason. I think it was 7-8 years ago we met down in Melbourne, Jason, at a conference and been in touch ever since. But you're right, we haven't really, I don't think many CISOs have had time to sort of deep dive into their strategy or even the action plan, which is where the meat is, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And that's it. I think that, that sort of came out in the two parts. And what I noticed is, and this often happens, especially in the land of LinkedIn, is that everyone's backslapping and patting on the back and saying, oh, this is great. And I think a strategy is great, and I think it's good that we're aspirationally looking at something. And at the same time, I think we've got to be realistic and say, okay, now that we've got it on paper, how does that actually get delivered? What does it look like? Where are our resources? How can we be involved? And how do we sort of pull it together? And I think that's where, I'm sort of keen. I think my first post, which sort of flared up a little bit, was more based around the funding amounts. I think it worked out rough numbers around $17 US per head of population over the period of time with our budget. And as I said before, when comparing that to even the UK and US, if we're looking at an AUKUS type situation, they're up around between 65 and 75. We've got 70 million people there and over 300 million people there. So, I'd like to sort of dig into how do we deliver this, with where we're going to get the money and how do we do it? Do we front load all that money in the hope that we have more money down the track? Because it's a key thing. I mean, we have a cyber minister, Claire O'Neill, which is great. But we just need to bring the whole community together and I think all pitch in and say, how do we, spread the load and actually deliver this? So that's sort of what I'd like to explore. But, we always say what we think, which is good. And that's why I'm glad to have you on here, because I know you always call a spade a shovel. So, looking forward to this one.
Yeah, there's some interesting numbers, actually, when you look at it financially per head. I wasn't aware of those. But look, at least there's money on the table. So let's see what we can do with what we've got.
Absolutely. Yeah. So,
right.
Tommy, do you want to follow with any questions and lead us down the garden path?
Well, let's start off just a little bit about, what is the role of a Chief Information Security Officer? Dan, tell us a little bit about that. And then, how important they are, kind of what size companies in, leading us towards being cyber secure and kind of meeting the strategy.
Yep. Okay. Yeah. Sure thing. So I guess it depends on the organisation, right? Smaller organisations, a CISO or a Chief Information Security Officer is probably a lot more hands-on. In a larger organisation, more of a leader role, strategy role, vision role, and integration into the business to I guess support their aspirations and make sure they're secure along the way. And complying with any sort of relevant legislation. So in my role, I'm at a university. We've got a good cybersecurity team. And so I spend a lot of my time on the strategy and vision, team leadership, making sure we've got the right people in place, making sure we can keep the people. People are absolutely key to us. And supporting the university's ambitions around education and research and making sure we are protecting our core assets, which for us are our student information, our staff information, and research, which is often critical in the national interest as well.
Yeah. Oh, wonderful. Now, first to you, Jason, and then over to you, Dan. What do you think are the critical components of the strategy? It's broken up into 6 shields. There's 3 2-year sprints around this. Is it the goals? Is it the shield? Have we got something here that is a clear roadmap? Or, what do you think are the core components that need to be focused on? Over to you, Jason, first.
Yeah, I think it's a lot. So to chunk it down, I think this is where we need to almost, like Dan's talking about, and this is again why I love having Dan on here, because Monash is no different to the micro version of the macro version of what we're trying to do as a country. So I think we need to break it down a bit more. Like we've got this macro, this overall strategy, but then how does that crunch down? So I think we all need to focus. So me being passionate on startups and small business and sort of focusing on there. Like when we started Cyber Aware, that was specifically for SMBs, and that market. And I think it often gets overlooked, because it is hard. They don't, and if you're a company trying to service that market, there's not much money in it, right? So everyone focuses when they're going to do a cyber product or service or solution on the bigger end of the market because they have the money, they know they need to solve for it, and they're often in some ways forced to do it, whether it be because of SOCI or because of whatever legislation or regulation they have to follow. They sort of have to do it, right? But businesses don't have to. It's not forced upon them or anything like that. And I think this is where the biggest holes are, where we see most problems. Like we see, I think Ian Yip did a really good post from Avertro. I think, did you say that too, Dan? It's like a company lost $1 billion in a cyber attack, right? But this is a company that's worth, hundreds of billions of dollars. So, it's all relative. But when a small business loses 20 grand, 60 grand, 80 grand, or 100 grand, it could wipe the business out, right? So we see Medibank and we see Optus and we see Latitude, and they take a hit, right, to some degree, but it's nothing to the degree of the money they actually have. So it's all relative. So I think the sovereign citizens part, and the government is doing that, putting the campaign out there that I've always been banging on about, the slip, slap of cybersecurity, the passwords or the passphrases the government's using, multi-factor authentication, updates when available. They've got a campaign out there, but have we hit the mark with the campaign? The New Zealand campaign with regard to their cybersecurity stuff had a bit of humour and a bit of an element of something to it, which has got eyeballs, got people sharing, So we need to be a bit more innovative, I think, here in Australia. And if we are going to look at sovereign capability, where are we going to fit in the market? You talked about mining off the top, like we are always mining, or it's the sheep's back, or it's wheat. But we have to become innovative, and that's something Malcolm Turnbull is looking to drive, is become a smarter nation. And we have the opportunity, and Dan and I talk a lot about crypto and blockchain, and AI's on the mark now, so all these things need to be taken into account, and a strategy that's that far out is something that is going to have to pivot a lot. So let's front load and do what we can now, knowing that it's going to change within 12 or 24 months.
I think overall, I think it's a good strategy. I think it's something that is achievable. I really like that it's broken up into different components. Like it's got a consumer focus, for example, as well as the critical infrastructure focus. They're all very different. And then later on, talking about leadership and regional leadership and those sorts of things, as well as supporting businesses, whether that's small or large enterprises. So I think it's got like a good mix. And to your point, that the minister has been, or her office has been posting quite regularly now around awareness. So some of the hygiene stuff, so passwords and MFA. So I think that's like a really good start from a really senior person in the government. But New Zealand have done some really quirky stuff, and I think that's you do need to do something a little bit different to get eyeballs on it. But I think it's a good start. The sovereign capabilities is a really interesting one, and I don't think there's a silver bullet here. Like, how do we typically when you look at even in technology more broadly, how do we keep what we build in Australia within Australia and not just disappear overseas and go to a bigger market? Like, I think it is going to be a big challenge, but I like that it is there as its own shield and focus area for the next 7 years.
And before you go next one, Tom, because I'd like to also point out, Dan has been a great mentor, and he was involved in a lot of the CISOs programs and mentoring a lot of businesses that were coming out of there. So I agree, and Dan, this is another thing we've spoken about off campus, but about how we support our startups here and actually produce better startups. And I think we're looking at that sovereign capability, don't you think, Dan? I think, wouldn't it be nice to have a hit list of put together by CISOs like yourself of saying, here's the top 3 things we need to solve for, and actually put a pot of money there that actual companies can go for and say, actually, we could build that and give them some money that way, So we're actually solving for top 3, top 5 type sort of scenarios, rather than just saying, oh, you're a cyber business, here's a chunk of money, go away and go do it, right? And it doesn't fall on your radar as something you want to buy, but I'm sure you'd give them a proof of concept and support them in any way you would. And you might even chuck some of your own money in there if it's something, you get skin in the game, you've got proof of concept, and it's something that's going to go overseas, because we're such a small market here. We make up 1.3% of the cyber sales market. So it's a drop in the ocean. So if you're a startup here, you have to go to the US, you have to go to Europe, you have to go to Asia, you have to go somewhere else, because we're too small of a market here. But we need to follow leads like Israel, with 30% of the billion-dollar companies coming out of there, and stand for something in cyber and pick a lane and actually say, let's just become expert at that as a country. If we're going to be, and looking at an even bigger thing, if we're going to be part of AUKUS, where do we actually sit in the AUKUS thing, and where can we add more value, in that value chain, right? You can't be everything. We're too small.
Yeah, I think that is an interesting approach, and you're right. We did a lot with Cyrise, saw some really good companies come through there. I'm still a customer of many of those as well. As sort of put the money where the mouth is, and they are industry leading organisations. I think it is an interesting approach for CISOs to put money in. Obviously, that declare conflicts and those sorts of things, but I think that is a genuine way to approach it, right? If someone is willing to put their money where their mouth is, you're probably onto something, but. That's also a gap in terms of CISOs and the community really defining the problem, because some of the stuff that we did see through Cyrise and other incubators was startups solving problems that didn't exist, right? Or didn't exist at scale, or were too early. They're 5 or 10 years too early. So, I think most organizations are still trying to solve a lot of the basic hygiene and 101 type stuff at scale as well.
Yeah, and that's it. I think that's what we've got to do is exactly that, right? You've got to pick, and it's not a knock, but it's a skill to run a business, right? It's a skill to do a startup, and I just don't know if we have the right people around the businesses to help them either that actually have that skill set, So I think we need to develop more of a community, get the people who have got the runs on board in the past to form groups, to then put guardrails around these businesses and help them succeed. It doesn't guarantee success because it's going to be more likely. And the government then, if they do choose to back or put money into it, they're going to be backing something that's a lot more tangible. It has more chance of success than what we've had in the past.
Yeah. Given your background, Jason, I might ask you a question. You've done a lot of startups and within our industry and outside. Like, what do other countries do to incentivize those startups? Like, are there tax breaks? Are there what could Australia do that they aren't doing in the big picture?
Yeah, I think firstly that culturally we're not as good. So we don't encourage entrepreneurialism and actually startups, and the banks and the financiers, even in the basic level, are so conservative. They're asking for you to put your house on the line to actually go do a startup oftentimes, right?
Yep.
In America and other countries, they encourage to be an entrepreneur. They champion that and say go for it. The tall poppy syndrome's alive and well, don't get me wrong. It's very difficult here. No one gives anyone a chance here as a startup. Government should be buying from our country. Like our governments go and choose offshore product more times than they should, and they should be giving more of a go here. And that's at federal and state, even at local council level.
Yep.
You're not to blame here because you have given a fair run, but there's so many people who just don't give us a chance, right? And so that's the hard part. And it's expensive from Australia to then go offshore. Israel's a different kettle of fish, and I said 30% of billion-dollar companies out of cyber come from Israel, but they have compulsory service, and anyone who's any good at cyber has 5.5 years active service. And when I say active service, it's active. Like we can see currently what's happening at the moment. These people are actually dealing with not simulations, real life shit, right?
Yep.
So when they come out of 5.5 years of that, they're actually ready to go, and they form teams out of there, and then they get straight into sandbox environments in the equivalent of the big banks and telcos and everything over in Israel. And VCs from America have actually set up in Tel Aviv just waiting for the next one to come out. So they've got a different method. I'm not saying that's the best method, but if we got people here coming out of ASD and stuff doing simulations, there's some doing hands-on tools, but not to the degree that they're getting there. But I think we just need culturally to become more entrepreneurial, back more things. But also, as I said, set the guideposts what we're looking for. You're better off saying, here's the top 3, 5, 10 things that we're looking for in cybersecurity. Yep. If you can produce something like that, then we'll give you some money to back you, and then you'll feed it in. And it can be a mix of not just CISOs, but I'm saying private money. I know private people who want to invest in cybersecurity, and then I know government would back it. You could have a 3-way pie of a fund that people could then go into. Make it better with tax incentives as well.
Yeah.
Got to be like when I started Star with Whiskey, we used R&D tax concessions almost exclusively because the GFC hit a year after we started that business. So we were in a real bind with raising capital, and you had to get creative. CyberAware, that was cash flowed ourselves, and we were lucky, not lucky, well, we made our own luck getting out of the gates and getting some decent sales at the start. But the fact is that more support, and we're not supporting people who are entrepreneurs. You're almost supported to get a job more than you are to actually go and create your own business here in Australia. So
yeah. I think particularly with the government entities, the agencies, big enterprises, like there's huge barriers. I've seen it myself in getting on procurement panels and things like that. So what are the incentives to sort of support the smaller startups and give them a go in an enterprise environment? It's a big problem.
It is, and I think it's good that we're starting to see, the Cyber CX where they sort of brought some businesses together and, started to do that sort of thing. There's been others trying to do that sort of thing. But again, in such a small market, we don't have the capacity, and then it's hard to get overseas. Because if you go to America, like, again, using Starwood as the example, you've got to find a beachhead into that market. So you've got to pick, where do we land? Are we East Coast or West Coast? If it is East Coast, is it New York? Is it Washington? Is it on the other side? Is it San Francisco? Is it Seattle? Or is it somewhere like Dallas, Texas? Or does Maryland give us a better tax incentive to land in there? Where do we set up banks and all that sort of stuff?
And then the relationships, right? The introductions and those sorts of things. I know you've been part of Austrade and those types of things in the past as well. I think we need to go a bit heavier on that sort of stuff.
Yeah, and that's like Tom and I met at Cyber, and that, it's finding like-minded people. That's why I've always got on well with you, and then why Tom and I are working together. It's to bring the whole community together and actually work collectively. For such a small community, we all know each other, but I think we could be doing better at actually helping each other. And as I say, even individually picking a lane and saying, I'm passionate about this, I'm going to do that. ASA does events, ACS does this, all the bodies do these sorts of things. And actually, there seems to be a lot of competition over the top of each other rather than actually saying, you do that, we'll do this, and let's all collectively work together to try and help lift, the rising tide lifts all boats sort of thing, and get that sort of happening in Australia. We still don't work very well in collaboration here.
Yep.
And just to kind of dive further into that, and I'll go to you first, Dan, with this, is the states and territories. I mean, federation, what we do, we've got a national strategy from the federal government, and we don't have anything that is kind of coordinated in around the states and territories. So, as you were just touching on, Jason, there, we've got these different peak bodies. One of the things that would make it accelerate this whole thing, I imagine, is if we did have a strategy that was coordinated right across all government levels and really brought business in. And, what kind of impact do you think that would have, Dan? And what are the key challenges to that happening at the moment?
Yeah, you're right. And I think the federal one's quite good. The Victorian state one is quite good as well, but there's no correlation between them. They are separate. They're both good pieces of work, but there's no correlation between the activities or the priorities there. So it would be good to see that as well. But then I think it's good to tie into how that applies to business as well. So how can they align with things? How can everyone have the same priority? Like, if we're giving an easy example, if we're going to go hard for the next year around some really basic hygiene stuff, so MFA and passwords, right? We do that from a public perspective. It's coming from the federal level, state level, and then there's funding and resources available to communicate that at the community level as well. Like, I think that's where it could be really powerful when you're hearing things at work, you're hearing things as a customer, you're hearing things on TV and social media, and it's all the same thing. I think that would be very, very powerful.
Yep. Yeah, I agree. That's the slip, stop, slap stuff. That's, that campaign for sun safety and we've spoken about seatbelts and brushing your teeth, all that sort of stuff. This has to be in that same category as government for pushing. And that's why I think they need to become a bit smarter, because shareable stuff is what does it these days.
Yep.
If you do something really smart, advertising wise, kids are going to share it. And they're going to say, check. And subliminally, they're going to keep picking up this messaging of passwords or MFA and all that sort of stuff. If they just put some sort of tweak on it and actually leverage it through things like TikTok and Instagram and shareable content, the ads are just, you see them and they're trying to be that real scary ad, and like, people just switch off to that stuff and go, I didn't do my update and that happened, or I used the same password. It's just not going to anchor as hard as if you put something in a bit smarter and more viral.
I think just on that vein, it's a little bit of a tangent, but in terms of sharing, I think it can be really powerful to share experiences at an organisational level. And just, in my mind, the ANU, so the Australian National University, they had their big couple of breaches, 6-7 years ago now, but they shared a full debrief of what happened, right? And there was not just in the university sector, but across the whole of Australia, there was so many lessons learnt from that. There was so much awareness that happened. There was, so much remediation activities that happened in organisations because they didn't want that to happen to them. I think that's really powerful. That should be encouraged. The other day I saw South Australia Power Networks. They had published their own internal report publicly around cybersecurity, what they'd seen for the last year, the types of attacks, the types of remediation they'd done. Like, that's very open and collaborative. And I read this and go, oh, wow, I can learn from that. Can you imagine if everyone did that? So, I think there's at an organisational level, that'd be fantastic. if we got federal agencies to do that and publish that, and then a step further, from a governance perspective, what if you had to have a page or two in your annual report that spoke about cybersecurity? Like, if we want to get really serious about it, we need to start sharing some of the war stories and lessons learned from other people as well. Like, that's probably the next level, but I think it would be really powerful to share some of that stuff.
That's what I've said for ages, because that's what happens. They shut the shutters down. All these attacks that happen, whether it be Optus or Medibank and Latitude, those big ones, but it's all the other ones as well. And that's exactly the case. What are we learning? Shutting down and blocking it off. The reason we get attacked so well is because on the dark side, on the dark web, they're sharing all this stuff. Hey, try this. This really worked. We'll give that a go. Hey, I did this email and I got like 1,000 hits in one day. You guys should give it a run. And they're working so collaboratively on that side of the fence. We need to be more open and share. And people are very quick to shut down on the cyber side as well. On the good side, people are MFA doesn't work. There's ways around MFA. So it's like, yeah, but if someone's not using MFA, it's like the more layers you can put in place, especially the basics and the foundational stuff for people, it's going to help. But people will go and jump on and go, oh no, MFA, you can crack that. Yeah, well, you can. You can.
But in 99% of cases, it's going to help, right? Absolutely. And of course, there's sensitive parts that wouldn't be shared, and from a legal perspective and privacy, but there's parts that can't be shared. But there's definitely lessons learned from every incident and observation of network and that type of stuff as well.
Even near incidents, there's ones that are near and close, and I know from talking to people in the industry how close people have come to major catastrophe. But even sharing that, what we missed in the logs, this actually happened. We missed it because of this. So put that out there. It didn't affect them, but it could have if it was, missed any longer or something had happened. Just get more of that out there, and you're right.
To your point, and that is one of the pillars, right, around threat sharing and that. And as a CISO, this discussion comes up all the time. We need more threat intel. We need more. We need to share more. And people are happy to share more. The problem is, there are very few organizations and people creating threat intelligence. People are happy to share it, but you're talking about down in the logs and getting technical details. There is not a lot of that creation of the intelligence, and threat intelligence. The definition changes depending on who you talk to, but there is not a lot of creation, and I think that needs to be a focus area as well.
Have you seen AI change as well? Sorry, I was just going to say, have you seen AI change that? Like, as in, from a log point of view, remember we had we still do have a lot of manual processing. I'd just be interested on the AI front. What have you seen, or where have you seen it used well so far on your side of the fence, like on the good side? Where's AI being used at the moment to sort of fast track or help expedite things that might have taken a while before?
I'm seeing it. I'm seeing it best implemented in products that are not talking about it, right? So I'm seeing a lot of, we're using AI, et cetera, et cetera. You're probably not using AI. You just got a big data set and you're crunching it. But, I'll give you an example. I'm not going to name vendor, but, from an email perspective, we're seeing a lot of smarts with genuine AI looking at behavior, language behavior, looking at emails and actually detecting a lot more that previously would have taken manual activity from an analyst to sort of go through the history and look at behaviors within communication styles and those types of things, and really saving a lot of time and really increasing the detection rates. So that's one area where I've seen a lot of success. And again, it's sort of not sold as AI, which I think is probably healthy, but it is actually being used in the background to reduce those manual activities.
Yeah, that's good.
Sorry, no, that's all right. I just wanted to touch a little bit more on the cultural aspect you guys were really talking about, because, stories is how we teach, it's how we learn, how we drive empathy. So, do you think that as cybersecurity has really shifted into the mainstream, one of the key problems here is, the Australian Signals Directorate is a key player in disseminating this information. They are always going to be involved in secrecy. Do we maybe need to encourage this culture of openness and sharing to get everyone kind of moving forward a bit quicker by maybe separating away from some of the, kind of spy agency connections and stuff like that have really been there to date?
Look, I think there's always going to be things that are in the national interest and ongoing investigations, so things can't be shared. Like at a technical level, potentially indicators of compromise and TTPs, techniques and those types of things may be able to be shared at a machine-to-machine level. without sort of giving away the whole picture. But I do think, and we see this with the ACSE as well, like they cannot share as much as would be helpful to organisations, and so I think that does need to be tackled as well. But I think it is a bit of a challenge, right? I admit that there are often ongoing investigations there, and they can't share everything in real time. So. Look, I think that the JCSCs and the ACSCs are making a lot of headway into this. And if you're familiar with the CTI platforms or CITES, the Cyber Threat Intelligence Sharing Platform, there's a lot more adoption of that. There's a lot more bi-directional using of those types of platforms. So organisations are feeding in, and that's being shared out. So I think that is a good start and a good approach. But yeah, I think we do need to separate out, what's really sensitive from a national security perspective and a criminal investigation perspective, and probably accept that we are not going to get everything in real time. But those sort of CITES platforms and the bi-directional sharing, I think, is a really good start.
Yeah. And Jason, you talk about that education component and starting people up earlier. I guess what I was trying to kind of touch on there is that do we need to separate part of this conversation to make it digestible by a larger group of society so they can kind of, jump on it, and then it becomes something you can inject into, education at an earlier age?
Yeah, I think that I've always been a proponent, as you know, and Dan and I spoke about getting it in earlier, right? So we did talk about you get a kid to put the seatbelt on or into a baby seat, you get them brushing their teeth as early as possible, get good habits, hygiene or otherwise, in early, right? And online, I know both the girls had phones in their hand and could use them before they could speak. They were so intuitive to get onto an Apple phone to open it up to get into an app and do whatever they had to do. We wouldn't throw the keys to a kid and say, go drive a car without actually having any experience or having someone watching them or putting some guardrails in place. Yet we let people get on the internet. We say to kids, you got a pen license, you can write. That's great. But how much writing are you to be doing in your life now in this digital world, So we need to have an online license for kids. They need to understand the basics of hygiene, build those in foundationally, because, the thing is, by the time they get to the workplace or into university where Dan is and having to unlearn bad habits, is really difficult, to try and break the habits of someone. And then it becomes, MFA, another step, I've got to go do something else. And I'll just bypass that. That's too hard, right? Or I can't remember all my passwords. I'll just have the same password across everything. And, that's these habits happen because they're not taught young enough, or we don't have those in place. So when Dan said about the government, can we do? Here's free password manager, whether it be Bitwarden or OnePassword or LastPass, whatever, and advertise that. The government will pay for it, right? For each individual in Australia to have a password manager, or pick from this 5 password managers here and pick the one you like. If you like the color of LastPass, or whatever the case is, but just put some stuff in, right? And MFA, just make it compulsory. You have to do MFA, right? Just force these sorts of things down there. And that'll make a difference. But Dan, you want to say something?
No, I was going to say I've got something positive to say about that. So my kids, similar phone, tablet, all that sort of stuff before they can walk, type thing. And of course, at home as a parent, some responsibility around teaching them privacy and security, and those sort of lines blur together for them. But if you look on the ABC, I think it's ABC Kids, there's a whole show that the kids actually love, which is about privacy and not sharing information online. Like, so there is that sort of stuff happening, and the kids, it is engaging for the kids. They learn that, and I've seen it firsthand. But I've seen them come home from school and talk about, hey, Dad, the password that I used is, super secure because of X, Y, and Z. And, it's good that on Roblox I chose this username because no one can work out my age, sex, or any of my location. And so, they are actually learning it in school. So I'm not aware of the particular programs, but it is built into what they're learning in primary school. And like I said, on the national broadcaster as well, there is a show that is engaging for the little ones as well.
So let's kind of dive back a little bit towards the strategy, and just love each of you to pick a major hurdle that you can see in implementing it. And Jason and I often talk about Australia wants to become a leader by 2030 in cybersecurity. Our mining is always going to kind of lapse to some degree, and the community within Australia of cybersecurity businesses needs to be strong. It doesn't need endless government support. It needs to kind of stand up on its own. But what are, to just over to each of you and to you first, Jason, one of the major hurdles you think is in front of us in meeting this strategy?
Yeah, look, I think I think one of the things is it's not, a lot of the stuff's not enforceable. So people don't change unless they actually are made to quite often. And, you know, like we do our tax return because there's a punishment if we don't do our tax, right? We'll get fined or there'll be some action. You could even go to jail, in extreme cases. I think with businesses at all levels, and there has to be varying degrees, but as part of the CSCAU and sharing that, with the SMB 1001 and with Home Affairs looking to put a health check later in the year, could we find a way maybe that that health check becomes something that is mandatory to do at least once a year for a business at all levels? There's 5 levels in the SMB 1001 from just a solo person all the way up. And is there something we can do for bigger business? Might be quarterly, reporting on that, and then yearly. I think that would feed a lot of stuff like Dan was talking about before. Also, it will feed into the fact that we can learn stuff. If we're getting live data and stuff fed back to us regularly from all businesses across Australia, rather than waiting like we do when we do our national audit, when we do the whole country and get a snapshot of it, and where everyone's playing and what they're doing, where they're living, where they're working, etc. It would be good to get a snapshot of cybersecurity from the whole of the country on a regular basis, and I think that would help, so we work out from people's tax returns if people are making profits or not. Listed companies have to report. So I agree with Dan. I think all businesses should be mandatory, especially at the top end. But I'd love to see a small business at least once a year have to go, have I got a password manager in place, and is it up to date? Have I got all my software up to date? Have I got multi-factor authentication? Just having that sort of thing. So I think that'd be a good step just to start with, and just start to get as part of having to do something will make it more likely to change, and saying here's a plan that we should all follow.
Yeah, I think there's a missed opportunity, just to jump on your point, Jason, to go a bit harder at the governance level. So just looking to the US, and I genuinely think the US is leading in this space around making boards and directors accountable and actually caring about cyber. So, from an SEC perspective, they do need to have cyber skills or representation on the board or engaging with the right people. So are we ensuring that the board is talking to the CISO? Is it an unfiltered discussion? Not every organisation is going to have a CISO. They're talking to the right people, the head of IT, whatever it is. But again, back to the annual report, then do you need something in your annual report, like so that you can show that you are talking about cybersecurity? The old noses in, fingers out. Are you asking the right questions? So I think, I think there is a missed opportunity to go a bit harder there. So I would have liked to see that. Again, remaining positive. I think overall the strategy is pretty good. The one area that I think is, again, a missed opportunity is for government to lead by example. Now, I know there is some detail in the action plan, but if we said, we're going to get all of our federal agencies up to meet level 1 of Essential 8, all of them, right? And we're going to record how we got there. There's going to be challenges. And, in 3 or 4 years, they can come out and say, look, it was bloody hard. And here's the lessons learned. If we can do it, you can do it too. And I think, those types of things would be very, very powerful. One of the things that the US is doing is with their federal agencies is around a coordinated vulnerability disclosure program, right? I reckon that is absolutely brilliant. I think vulnerability disclosure programs, bug bounty programs, amazing return on investment. And from an organization's perspective, from identifying skills in the market, like it is a win-win for everybody. And something like that, they could really lead by example, take the, pull the veil back on what a vulnerability disclosure program is, show that it can be quite a positive experience, encourage organizations to adopt it. Again, they would publish their policies and how they're approaching it and their lessons learned, and it could be adopted by organizations as well. So I think, again, there is some potential missed opportunities to sort of lead by example and tell the war stories. They're not going to come overnight, but, it was bloody hard. We did it. This is what we learned, and this is how we'd approach it if we we're going to do it again. I think that'd be really, really strong.
That's a good idea. Yeah, because that's like Bug Crowd. Casey, they're doing great stuff now. And they've been slaving away for ages, but they're really starting to get some traction now, especially the US. So, but I agree. That's how we find stuff, and exactly open it up. And I think we just need to make cybersecurity more approachable, not so scary.
Yep.
It's it's actually, I love it and I get excited by it and I really love doing it. But it's just how do we get that message through to the normal person? It's not a scary thing. It's actually an advantageous thing. And it's actually, and this is where, and again, we're going to take on another tangent, but the career pathway. If we do start teaching this stuff in schools and actually making it a bit sexier, and it helps having a sexy man like Dan Maslin on, that people go, actually, that's something I could actually go and do. I want to go and do cybersecurity because it's cool, it's sexy. I get to protect people. A lot of people look at nursing and go, I really want to help people.
Yep.
Cybersecurity at its core, you're actually helping and protecting people and actually making the world a safer place, by actually protecting it. Making people, because people, once they lose this money, there's people that have committed suicide and all sorts of health issues, things have happened off, major cyber attacks. The thing is, people often just look at the dollar amount and think, oh, that business has gone by the wayside. But what's the knock-on effect of that business that employed 15 people and their families and their life and the person who actually didn't have the right things in place? The knock-on effect of cybersecurity has a wide-ranging impact that I don't think is looked at enough. And for people in the profession, and seeing CyberMinds, so Tom and I go and see CyberMinds when we're in San Francisco next month. Yeah, Peter's worked with CyberMinds. I know you've had some involvement with them too. The mental strain on people in the cyber industry is something that's not spoken about either. It's a really hard gig, and it's hard to get support in there as well. So I think we're opening up a little bit of a Pandora's box, but I think there's so many layers to it. I think with cybersecurity that we can help if we actually make it more approachable, support the people doing it. It's just you feel like you're sort of banging your head against a brick wall sometimes, I think, so I'm hoping this strategy does open up the market a lot more and actually open up a lot more conversations and make this a career path that people actually want to go to and that we can actually really be proud of and proud of the people in there and actually make a real difference.
Yeah, it's a bit of a tangent, but that did occur to me as well. That we are encouraging people to get into cyber, but then there is the mental health and the burnout side as well, and that's not spoken about in the strategy or the action plan. I don't know whether that's the right place for it, but probably 2 points. Back to your point, like if you talk to anybody that's had their identity stolen, it is incredibly stressful and it is years and years of pain, right? It is real. The effects are really significant on the individual and on their families, their personal life, their health, the whole lot. So the flow-on effects obviously are not often spoken about. The other point I'll make is around, I had an event this week. I had 6 of my team talk to about 40 students that were coming through IT and cybersecurity degrees. And one of the panelists, she made a really good point, and this really stuck with me. Cybersecurity is not a career, it's a lifestyle. Because you actually, and she was spot on, you don't switch off, right? And you've actually got to be passionate about it. It's not something that you can just do and then just at the end of the day forget about it, right? I'm not saying you need to work 24/7, but things are happening outside of business hours and you're across it, you're reading the news, you come home, you talk to your family like you say, then you're encouraging your kids or your parents or your friends to have good behaviors. You go to the shops, you see someone with a password up on their screen or whatever. Like it's nonstop, and you think about it all the time. You've got to be passionate about it. The downside to that is then you don't get to switch off. It's going forever. And I'm not saying other roles don't have that and other industries don't have that as well. You'd see that in many professions, but it's something to be aware of. And you can't drive passion, right? People need to be passionate to get into the roles. So that's the challenge as well.
Yep. All right. Well, I've got one last question for both of you, and this is a bit of an aspirational one for you. It's not the federal government's responsibility to fund and solve all of these problems in cybersecurity. Business has got to there to take ownership. As Australia, people living in Australia, we've got a responsibility too, to do the basics in 2FA. But, to you first, Dan, if there's one spot that you could, say I'd really like to see a large kind of increase in spending here because of the impact, within that cybersecurity strategy framework, where would that be?
And again, I do agree. It's not up to government to fix all of the problems. So there's multiple layers to this. I'm probably going to steal what Jason is probably thinking, but I think around the awareness campaign, like you made the point around the seatbelt and those types of things, right? So when you're in the car, you put the seatbelt on. It's a no-brainer these days. I think those multi-layered awareness campaigns are going to be a really, really good start. And that will help with 99% of the things that we're seeing at the moment. So it's the passwords, it's the MFA, it's the awareness around clicking on SMSs, on emails, those types of things. So if you're hearing it in the workplace, you're hearing it at your family dinners, you're hearing it at the schools, like I think that's how it's going to get through. The approach of the TAC campaigns of 20, 30 years ago being very successful. So I think that is where, at the moment, the priority should be, and the focused investment should be. There's other parts, but I think that would be a significant return on investment in the first couple of years.
Yeah, great. Yeah, and that's we're on the same page as usual. It's front loading this. Like if you put a budget together and where are you going to get your best bang for buck, it's exactly there. Because the bigger corporations are already doing a lot of stuff with regard to trying to train people in the workplace, but it's not happening outside of that. And what happens if you're trying to teach them work is, actually, I don't really care about my workplace. I just do work. So if they got hacked or not, I don't really care. But then if you can show them how that relates back home, and then how do you protect yourself and your family, or what you do care about, that makes a big difference. And I think that's where we need to sort of pivot to, is that we're teaching you these skills like occupational health and safety. We want all workers to go home safe, right? In the workplace, you don't want people getting killed in a workplace accident. That's reduced because of the work safe ads and everything. People are aware of that. You see, whenever there's water on the floor now, there's always a sign there, that the water's there or something. So we need to do the same online as well with online behaviour, to call stuff out, to see stuff, to make sure that people are aware that they could be in danger. So take care, take caution, and here's how you actually handle it. So, we're almost going for a zero trust. Just trust nothing, really. Any email that, especially with AI now, that looks like or smells a little bit fishy or not trustworthy, go direct to the source. Go to the website, ring the phone number. Before transferring large amounts of money, make sure you're ringing to say, I've never dealt business with you before. I'm about to transfer $1,500 or $15,000 or $50,000. Is this your bank account details? Can I just get a verbal clarification on that before transferring the cash? So all these little things we just need to teach people just to make sure they're safe. And it'll make a big difference, I think. But yeah, it just starts incremental change, starts in the schools and works all the way up.
Yep.
Yeah, I think listening to both of you, I'm reminded, the very successful and award-winning WorkSafe campaigns in Victoria started out about being safe at home. And once they kind of built that conversation in, they only shifted to the workplaces after that. So, yeah, look, and completely, I agree with you. It's about communication and getting it out there. And at this point, we need to do more than just a single ad to a single kind of group. We need to be hitting, a multi-layered campaign. And, you'd see that impact as you raised with Slip, Slop, Slap, Jason. That didn't get embedded overnight. That got embedded over years and years and years. It's catchy, but it had that repetition. Well, look, I just want to say thank you both for joining us on our first episode of Future Secured. Thank you very much. And to our listeners out there, if you could jump on, hit the subscribe button, please jump in, send us a comment, ask us a question. You can find more details about Dan Maslin in the show notes and his LinkedIn profile. And I just want to say thank you, guys. Really appreciate you joining us.
Thank you, Tommy, and thank you, Dan.
Been a good chat. Thanks, Tom. Thanks, Jason.